We're live.
Hello. How are we feeling?
Good. How you
Hey,
doing?
hey. Yeah, happy Friday.
Good. Happy Friday.
We made it to another one.
Happy Friday. I feel like I got to reuse the energy. I already kind of came in with it already, but yes, happy
Yeah,
Friday.
the backstage energy.
Yeah, the green room energy.
Yes.
Exactly. Okay, well, welcome to the Superchain quarterly webinar, everyone. Joining me today is Ryan Wyatt, the Chief Growth Officer at Optimism, and Dee Goins, co-founder of Zora, which is one of the networks built on the OP stack and is maintained by the Optimism Collective. In addition to the discussion we're doing today, we will open up the floor to Q&A at the end for community members. So if you have questions, post them in the chat or save them for the end. We'll try to get to you. I'll remind you guys around the 30-minute mark that we're also doing questions. With that all said, let's start with some background and context. The Superchain, which consists of a collective of different chains building with the OP stack, currently has over $15 billion in total assets on chain. That metric has been continuously growing. I know, wow is right. And it's up over 100% since the beginning of the year. The daily average transaction volume is about $3 million across all chains within the ecosystem, and it peaked in early April of this quarter around 4.6 million. With that said, there can be a lot of speculation on what's driving growth, but who better to ask than Ryan, Chief Growth Officer? So what do you think is causing this growth moment for Superchain in the past quarter?
Yeah, I mean, if you look like about a year ago is kind of when Optimism moved from this, hey, we have one blockchain, it's OP mainnet, that's our focus, to, hey, let's focus on having the OP stack available to anybody at MIT open license. Let's also figure out how we can have like more intimate partnerships and relationships with those who want to spin up blockchains. And so, Base, Zora, some of these folks were kind of the first adopters of jumping into it. And really, they have set the tone for others, right? Like, I mean, I think just being like great advocates and evangelists for the Superchain and this idea of we can go further if we build together. That has been like a mantra that everyone pushes, and it really has become kind of like a huge belief inside of the Superchain. And so what has happened is I think that effort over the last year has really started to compound in the last quarter. Way more chains that are signing up for OP Stack that want to be a part of the Superchain, that want to be a part of this shared vision. And so it's really hit a catalyst. And honestly, I'm excited for next quarter because like really that, I think you could really start to feel it in Q1 and is like started to pick up more and more. The other thing is like we brought in a little bit of the Superchain definition because when we originally launched the OP stack, we had something that's like you had to really stick to this very specific configuration, and that allows us to have like interoperability amongst these chains. But you had folks that had already launched on the MIT open license OP stack, and they had made a lot of different configuration changes that kind of moved them away. But they still wanted to be a part of the Superchain, and they wanted to make the changes to their blockchain to come into line and be part of our standard configuration. And so we've also expanded the definition where like more people are coming in and they're working towards, being part of that subset of, what we call kind of like the standard configuration of OP Stack, which is what Zora's on and Base and Mode and all these big blockchains. And so, yeah, I think we as like the Superchain and as a group of individuals and team members have really just like found our stride a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And then Dee, for you, obviously Zora is a part of the Superchain. Looking back on when you joined, what even drove you to do this, like be a part of this?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you go back to around this time last year, maybe like a little bit before, most of the open editions market and minting market was sort of log jammed due to high L1 costs. Like it was almost like impossible to mint. And so going in, we were like, well, we have to figure out a structural solution to alleviate the sort of cost burden on creators who want to bring their work on chain, but unfortunately have to spend maybe tens, if not hundreds of dollars to do so, or collectors who want to engage with amazing work on chain, but again, have to spend exorbitant amounts of money to do so. And so we looked at a myriad of options. I think our CTO, Tyson, my co-founder, has been hacking at building a Zora chain or a Zora network pretty much since the Zora genesis. So that's like almost 4 years ago. And so he's explored all the options and found this one to be flexible, scalable. It had a ton of developer advocacy. We had already heard sort of creator and collector demand to go explore these avenues, including OP mainnet. And so the combination of sort of market demand technical flexibility, developer advocacy, a robust community around it, made it a pretty much no-brainer decision for us to pursue. And then once we actually were able to get the network up and running, I mean, it took us a few months to sort of build out the requisite infrastructure, if you will, for developers to, actually bring their protocols or products to market on Zora Network. But once we got through that phase, we really focused on building some product features that allowed creators and collectors to more easily engage with creativity on the Superchain. And so that includes things like cross-chain payments, which allows you to spend ETH that you have on Base on Zora Network or on Zora Network on OP Mainnet. It included ERC20 minting, which allowed new communities to use Zora in new ways, including ERC20 tokens across the Superchain. And so I think we were able to, to Ryan's point, bring a lot of those compounding returns on the sort of development of the entire ecosystem, including each of these cultural communities, and bring that into the product in a pretty exciting way that led to some pretty rapid growth in April. And so that's sort of the calculus of how we decided. It has definitely proven to be an amazing and successful decision for us so far. And I'm pretty excited about everything that's to come for the rest of the year.
Yeah, no, amazing. I'm glad you brought up the growth in April, because in the intro, I talked about a lot of numbers about the daily average transaction volumes, et cetera. But for Zora, the daily average transaction volume spiked in early April around 878,000. And the average one is around 100K, give or take, on like a normal week. What do you think kind of drove the spike then? And what is Zora kind of doing to increase transactions on the network, get more people engaged, and really like continue to build?
Yeah, so this year we sort of rounded out what I would say is sort of like the V1 of the necessary like infrastructure on the network. And so that included things like Dune, OpenSea, and then this year also Uniswap. Having Uniswap on Zora Network obviously unlocks a whole world of ERC20 capabilities, DEX capabilities, which just bring a lot more activity and attention to the network. You combine that with the ability to mint and create with those same tokens, and that leads to a pretty explosive and powerful moment. And so in April, all of those things sort of came to a head. We had many different communities which were launching ERC20 tokens across the Superchain start to create with those tokens on Zora. We had many collectors start to collect media that was listed in tokens like Degen or Hire or Imagine or Enjoy. Like these all were becoming currencies for creation in a way. And people were using those currencies on Zora to engage and collect with media. And I think that brought a lot of attention, particularly given the macro environment was pretty excited about that type of token. And it brought a lot of excitement on what you could do creatively to start essentially like posting tagged media. Like if you think of everything that was getting listed in Hire, that was essentially like a Hire tagged post. And this was like the first time that you could really do that across the Superchain. And so I think it's the combination of sort of requisite infrastructure at the network level, like a Uniswap, plus innovative product features on the Zora.co and Zora protocol side, which sort of coalesced in this pretty amazing moment of activity on Zora Network.
Yeah, 100%. Ryan, what's your take on that when it comes to Zora's growth there?
No, I love it. I think like, by the way, I always say this, like Dee and Jacob and that founding team is Zora, they're like the most creative people in the entire space, by far. So like, I think by far.
Way too kind. Way too kind.
No,
I'll give them the
true.
trophy. Yeah.
So true. Like I first got to meet them like 6 months ago and I was like blown away by them. I think it's a long-term game of iterating and trying different things. Things spike up. You know, if you look at like Base, they have the meme token craze as well. And then that kind of comes down and you'll have this ebb and flow. And I think I look at it over a long period of time. Their like creativity, their ability to like resonate with the community, to be able to iterate on that product. Like you will see these peaks and valleys, but over a long period of time, I think you're going to see really great sustained growth with them. And it's just like, there is just not a lot of people in this space that have like this unique creativity and are very much in touch with community and have high-end product chops. These are like, you find people that have maybe like one of these three, maybe two of these three. I find them to be the most unique team that have all three of these things. So yeah, look, I think there's going to be those moments where you see these spikes that like Dee was talking about and like tapers out, but over a long period of time, I'm excited to see kind of like their growth up and to the right because of those like three variables.
Right. And when in between those spikes, the ebbs and flows, how do you two look at scaling ecosystems? Like what metrics do you follow as the most promising for, let's say, the next 2 quarters to finish out 2024?
Yeah, I would imagine Zoras are probably slightly different because like when we look from our perspective, it's like the health of the entire Superchain ecosystem. So you start to look at like L2 transaction market share for the entirety of the Superchain. You look at users, whether you do DAO or MAO or however you want to look at them, like active wallets. You look at that across the entire of the Superchain ecosystem. And this is and then revenue into the collective, right? Like I think that is a big metric. Ultimately, there's 850 million OP tokens for retro funding that should last many, 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 many years. But at some point, you want this economic flywheel from the Optimism collective that they can draw, like the community can draw from this, this reservoir of ETH that basically is being contributed from sequencer fees. But, that's like, you have to balance that's a long game. You have that time, but you still have to think about it. But ultimately, I'm looking for like the health of the super chain. And when you talk to like application builders, what do they get excited about? It's TVL and users and like marketing, whether it's like incentive or co-marketing, whatever it is. And so I do think TVL it's a very transient metric right now. It moves based on incentives from L2 to L2 to L2. But what will happen is over the next 12 months, these chains are going to be interoperable, right? And so now it might be transient from like, Zora to Base to Mode, but it will stay inside of the ecosystem. And I think that will be valuable for all of the chains that are operating in it. So it's slightly different, I would imagine. Maybe there's some things that like, D and the Zora team also care about here, but this is a good way of like measuring the health of the Superchain ecosystem is through these top metrics.
No, 100%.
Yeah, I think similarly, obviously we look at your core growth metrics around active users and retention, active wallets and all of that kind of stuff. But given that we are pretty laser focused on supporting the creator ecosystem and developers that want to build for the creator ecosystem, things like mints and the creations that happen on Zora Network are really important to us. How much unique supply is lining up on Zora Network is something that's very important to us. And then also like the distribution of our protocol rewards across that network. Like what's it look like in terms of the economic viability of the creators and collectors who are bringing amazing work on chain on Zora Network? What's their like sort of incentive for creating on the network, and like how are we distributing that? What does that power law look like across the entire network to make sure that we are in fact delivering on the promise of being a creator-centric L2? I think that's like a big deal for us. And then I think outside of that, it's sort of what are the dominant sort of categories of activity? Obviously, in our first year, we've been laser focused on minting activity and NFT activity. But I think as the network grows and matures, we'll want to expand the types of transaction activity that you see. And so that might include things like swaps. It might include things just sort of expanding the universe of what you can do on the network now that we've sort of built this initial base of creators and collectors that are having success there.
And what do you think would the timeline be for something like that, the expansion to other areas?
Well, sort of highlighting what I talked about earlier with the beginning of this year, like getting Uniswap, canonical Uniswap support was a pretty big deal for us. Networks that are of our sort of nascency don't really punch through all that well to onboard some of the blue chip protocols in that way, but we were able to do so. We are working on finalizing the rest of what that will look like this summer, which I'm really excited about, making it easier for people to use Uniswap on Zora Network. And then starting to onboard some of the other DeFi protocols or blue chip protocols in the space. They drive a lot of healthy network activity throughout the Superchain ecosystem. There's demand for those protocols on Zora Network. And so we're trying to meet that demand as quickly as we can this summer.
No, 100%. Speaking of the Superchain as a whole, the ecosystem, we've mentioned Zora, of course, Mode, Base, etc. During Q2, the Superchain also announced collaboration with others that are adding new chains to the network, like Metallisys's Metal, Banking L2, WorldCoin's WorldChain, Celo's migration to an L2, and others, right? There's a lot.
Busy.
I had to write it down.
Yeah.
There's so much. Ryan, speaking of all these chains, how big does the Superchain want to become?
Oh, what a great question. I mean, you could take it so many places. I think, look, ultimately, it would be great for the L2 transaction layer to be on OP Stack because it will allow for seamless interoperability. It'll allow for us to build together in a bigger way. And obviously, all of us have these Ethereum values that we're rooted in, and seeing things settle on Ethereum and like that being the final state would be that would be like the greatest outcome. But also it goes back to just building and iterating. Like when we look at the Superchain, you want good representation of a lot of different verticals. So like you have Redstone covering like fully on-chain games. You've got Zora that's like going deep with creators, right? And figuring out that experience. You have Base, which is kind of served as like a general purpose chain, Mode with DeFi. And so it's like, how do we start to have a very vibrant and diverse Superchain ecosystem is going to be really, really important. And so a lot of the moves that you've seen the foundation make have been to have better diversity and representation across the board. So it's probably better to think about it for now from that perspective than getting overly fixated on size. When you think about interoperability, we're going to be able to support, 30, 40, 50 chains over the next 12 to 18 months to be inside of this interoperable set. Long term, we're already making bets on ZK proofs with investments in like OM Labs and Risk Zero so that we can actually generate ZK proofs on the stack, which will allow for like increased horizontal scaling. And we'll have to see how the whole L2 landscape plays out. The good thing was with a lot of things that have happened over the past 6 months with like 4844 and spam batches and all of this, RAS providers, it is so cheap and easy to deploy an L2. That was like not the case a year ago. It's like very easy to get up. And so that will create kind of like a little bit of a rubber band effect where you have a bunch of people that want to deploy L2s. And the reality is, what does the dust look like when it all settles? And so I don't know that chasing this crazy, how many chains are in the Superchain is the right metric long term, because you'll see a little bit of that inevitably happen. Almost kind of like NFT, like 21, you had these like blue chips starting to like come to life, but then it was like, oh shit, minting NFTs and like
everyone's
so
gonna
easy,
make
like
it,
we're all gonna do it, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of that happened. I think you'll see something happen with L2s, which is okay. I think there will be a place for folks to either be an application and go be a chain, like a WorldCoin was an app on OP mainnet. They're gonna get so big, right? They hit 10 million users. They need their own chain. They're probably going to leverage tech that we've been working on with like Paradigm, like OP Ref, to get to this like giga gas and really scale. So the other thing you'll also see is L2s are pretty constrained on size right now, but that is changing. Base has been kind of playing out right now as they've increased the gas limit. So basically being able to put more transactions in each block. So I think what you'll see is the L2's ability to get bigger will be a big part of, do we really need thousands of L2s? Like if we're going to be able to make them able to have more transactions and more activity, that's an outcome. So yeah, we'll see. We will see. It's going to be really interesting. But I can tell you the next like 2 years we'll have like a lot of behavioral switches. Like, oh my God, everything's an L2, everything's an L3. To do we need this? We're better off as an application than having a RAS provider that's like running and operating our chain and having to like worry about the dev work there.
Do you see it kind of like
as easy as like spinning up your own website?
Yes. Yes.
Do you feel the need for like competitive chains in the sense that like, oh, you have Mode, that's DeFi. If another DeFi chain wanted to be a part of the Superchain, would you entertain that idea or no?
For sure. I think it's so good. Like we need it in this space. It's great. I think one, even within competition, like look at all the different developers that are contributing to OP Stack. It's not just like OP Labs. You have like Test and Prod, you have Base, you've got Sunnyside. I'm sure WorldCoin will start being a core dev contributing to OP Stack. And so yes, even in a world, you could see like a Base and WorldCoin, maybe had in certain areas actually compete with one of each other, but they're also going to make each other so much better because the contributions they make on the dev work. And so, yeah, that feels much further out because in the short term, like over the next couple of years, there's so much more that these teams can do collaboratively versus being competitive. But yeah, long term, at some point, you are going to fight for users. You're fighting for attention. Even like a Zora looking at like a Redstone, it's like, oh, we're not games. We don't care about games. We're not competitors. You're still competing with people's time, right? And it's like a finite amount of time, a finite amount of like economic activity you can have in chain. And so, yes, it's easy to be like a DeFi protocol here, DeFi protocol here. They're like completely at odds. But I don't know. I think if you have a lot of confidence in your project and what you're doing, you would rather have these people inside the ecosystem. You're still going to compete against them. Do you want to compete against them on, Arbitrum Orbit chain, or do you want to compete against them inside the Superchain? And I think the latter is a much better grounds to compete in, from my perspective.
Yeah, I think competition produces innovation, and we're fortunate in the Superchain ecosystem that innovation is a shared resource that can be used by many of the different teams that are competing with one another. And so I think that's like the beauty of the whole collective.
No, 100%. Dee, for you, what do you think are some of the biggest value adds you've noticed inside the Superchain ecosystem that might not be visible to the public, or that you would wish like the creators on Zora emphasized or used more?
Uh, yeah, I think it's very difficult to represent the sort of information sharing and like collective amount of conversation that happens amongst like the
Mhm.
Superchain leadership. Like I've talked to Ryan an obscene amount of hours. We've had their whole team join us here at the Zora office and do workshops and dinners. We've done the same thing with Jesse over at Base. I regularly talk to the guys at Mode, and so you sort of have this shared banner or flag of innovation, and you're all sort of championing these things together and trying to find ways that you can collectively grow each other's networks, user bases, integrate their tools, add their networks to your products, like all of these things. And so I think just like the general collective creation across the board is something that is very difficult to represent publicly, but it does happen a lot behind the scenes. And then I
Mhm.
think something that is much more obvious publicly is just like the level of collective like funding and like the sort of ripple effects, whether that's We Heart the Art, Retro PGF, you pick a funding model or mechanism, or if it's like a build-a-thon, like what Base is doing, like there's a lot of ways that we can all collaborate in helping to lift the developer and creative ecosystems, including sharing our tools as well as our capital. And so I think that's been a really promising byproduct of the collective as well.
No, 100%. And we'll get into like that funding incentive structures in the next section that we'll go to. But before we get there, I want to wrap up like the conversation of super chains. We talked about a bunch of different chains. Is there a specific chain you think would be the most successful in migrating or launching into super chains ecosystem in the future? And like, what are your hopes for new chains
Mm.
onboarding into the ecosystem as like
Yes.
one that's in it and then someone who's like bringing people in?
Yeah,
Mm.
there's two different, right? There's like people that are migrating over into the super chain. There's people like that are going to start their first blockchain. It depends on like the metrics, right? Like it's so, it's like you don't look at like a TVL metric for like a Zora like you would at Mode, right? So like
Mhm.
these things are different and their contributions different. Redstone, so awesome to have like a fully on-chain gaming ecosystem, but they're on Plasma, so they're not going to generate a lot of fees. And so you think about it from like it's part
Mm.
R&D, it's part they're going to bring different users into the Superchain ecosystem. You have to fundamentally believe that those users will then go try out your Zora, they'll go to Mode, they'll go to Base, and they'll like
Mm.
move around inside the ecosystem. And so people bring different value. And so I would say from like my perspective, it's just like those that are like really good teams with a really good idea that can like spend the time and actually invest and make this thing come to life is actually what you focus on. You take all those metrics we talked about at a macro and people are contributing to them in a different way, but you don't want to let that dictate it, because if you take it too obsessively and like say TVL's the end all be all, you start to then skew your focus on like everything that's like DeFi related, right? And then that just becomes like a DeFi ecosystem, which I don't think is like very attractive to other verticals that are looking for product market fit, right? The creator
Mhm.
economy, the gaming ecosystem. So yeah, I think that's the big thing. And we'll continue to welcome a bunch of different folks of different sizes into the super chain. And hopefully we're all learning, to Dee's point, and like iterating on it.
Yeah, 100%. Do you think there's a world or a future where like the chains building with the OP stack or in the super chain, et cetera, that are doing insanely well? Like think of, you brought up Base, for example. Would they leave the ecosystem and branch off as a competitor, or no? They're like here forever.
Um, it's a great question. I think like
Mm.
as always for anything, like you want to make sure that like the super chain is bringing value and it is like net additive
Right.
and positive. The
Mm.
beauty of OP Stack, it is MIT open license. Like you can exit the super chain. You should be able to have a path to exit the super chain. This is really
Mhm.
healthy. Like you don't want people to be like, you're in it forever,
Yeah.
right?
It's a
And so like
marriage.
we've worked actually really hard on all of these things to be like, you should have a path to exit. If at any point you feel like the super chain is not working for you, you should exit. The other thing too is there's a governance process. The people of across all these different chains, Zora included, they will have a voice. They will have a voting power inside, whether it's upgrades, whether it's where things go, like as far as funding and investments, whether, it's like
Mhm.
whether the fees need to be changed inside of the super chain for more. Like maybe some of the teams are like, we need to be contributing more to the collective. Maybe they're like, these fees are too aggressive now at this point. Like we got it off the ground 5 years ago. We should decrease the
Mm.
fee. The people will decide this in the governance process. So my hope is if, people can do that within that framework and make sure that like the collective whole and like where the voting power goes represents the best interests of everybody inside of it. So yeah, maybe one day they could. I highly doubt it. I think the Superchain does a great job of representing everybody's interests because their voices are all represented inside of it. And again, it's better to go together. Like, do you really want to be an isolated standalone L2? I wouldn't, right? I think it's much better to go through this thing together in a lot of different ways.
100%. Dee, what's your thoughts on that? I saw you raise your finger.
Plus. Well, I think it's important to protect the credible neutrality of the Superchain. And I think part of that is making sure that people do preserve their right to exit. So in the event that anything was to go awry, or in the event that anything does feel misaligned with your objectives as a team, you do have the ability to exit. I think Balaji speaks a lot about this as like a fundamental right of like a netizen, or particularly like a crypto citizen. And so being able to lift and shift and exit if you wanted to is always great to have. But again, to the points today, it's like there's such a groundswell, there's such like a real critical mass of developer advocacy, energy, brain power, and innovation in the Superchain ecosystem. It feels somewhat at odds to not at least want to be privy to what's happening there, let alone getting the maximum amount of benefit you could by building on it and integrating with some of these teams. And so I echo a lot of what Ryan said.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, kind of shifting gears. You slightly talked about funding before. Obviously, the Optimism Foundation also announced rewards and incentive structures to encourage builders to join the collective through operations like Retro Funding 4 and the On-Chain Summer Initiative with Base. Ryan, what are you trying to accomplish here with these funding programs? What are the types of projects you want to join the ecosystem? Tell me everything.
Yeah, retro funding at its core is impact equals profit. We have done 3 rounds, 4's up right now. We have learned a lot. I mean, like, and when I say we, again, it's like the community, right? Like, what do you orient for? How many tokens do you give out? How do you look at things that might be generating, profit and driving impact, generating fees to the collective, but then you have other projects that are like really impactful that might not be generating as much fees, but it's like, of course you want them around. And so I would say there's a lot of just good dialogue and good feedback. And so you run these rounds, you mess them up and you do some of it right and you iterate, right? Like there are people who have received funding from retro funding that probably shouldn't have in the grand scheme of things and in hindsight. There's folks who have gone on and gotten funding and ended up being like really high impact projects inside of the ecosystem. There's folks that you could argue like a Velodrome who have driven a lot of profit, but maybe haven't seen as much from retro funding that they should, So one thing is like, you'll never please everybody inside of the ecosystem. That's okay. I think the goal is being like really communicative, very transparent, having a lot of different voices represent. And the people that work inside of these like governance, whether it's grants council at the token house, whether it's delegates that are they are looking through thousands of applications of people building different stuff inside of the Superchain ecosystem. And it's a hard project. It was hard when it was just OP mainnet, one blockchain, one thing. Now they're literally looking at projects that are coming across from all these different Superchains. So look, I think at the end of the day, it's like you want to keep investing in people that are contributing to the Superchain ecosystem, whether it's dev tooling, whether it's projects, whether it's a creator minting an NFT on Zora. Like we want to make sure we run programs that touch all of them. Sometimes it's hard to run a program that will touch everybody. And so it's like, how do you get the right cadence of programs, the right size of these programs? How do you distribute them the right way? My guess is like, so this year we're going to run multiple programs. And one of the learnings was like, give people way more line of sight into what those different programs are going to be. So that they can start planning. If it's going to be retro funded, you need some visibility into like, how are you orienting where these funding buckets go? So I'm excited. And then that's like retro funding. And then the grants council and like the governance have a token allocation as well, where people can come in and ask for funding up front. So you have retro funding as a different mechanism. And then you've got like typical kind of DAO structure. Hey, we're going to go do X, Y, and Z. These are our deliverables. can we get a token grant? That used to be with Grants Council only for OP mainnet projects, application builders on OP mainnet. We've now opened that up in the spirit of the Superchains. The Grants Council is going to be looking at different programs that the chains might come. So Zora might come through Grants Council and be like, hey, we want to do a creator program or something. They'll have that optionality. So ultimately, it's like, you want to guide these things, but this is getting better and better being in the people and community's hand. But we have to iterate. Like the DAOs across the ecosystem have traditionally been pretty horrendous when deploying capital. And I think Optimism this process has done a really good job, but they got a high bar and there's a lot more work that they need to do. I think they would be the first to, the governance teams would be the first to admit that, but they've made great strides and, feedback and time, you'll get this right, I think.
Yeah. 100%. Dee, on your front, how has the Superchain kind of helped Zora creators in the past when it comes to this realm?
Yeah, I mean, amazing projects like We Heart the Art. It impacted tens of thousands of creators across the ecosystem, gave away millions of dollars in OP. It also spurred a lot of creativity throughout the ecosystem. I think since We Heart the Art, it's been like over 6 figures worth of creators who have now joined the Superchain ecosystem and minted. And so I think it's spurred growth. It's helped to put money in the pockets of the people who help make, amazing networks, amazingly creative. And so it's been super exciting from that front. And then the same thing has happened on RetroPGF as well, where the creators and users, as well as developers on top of Zora Network and our protocol, which interfaces with many of the Superchain networks, they've also benefited greatly financially. Many of them, after the last RetroPGF round, were sending me text messages or calling me and telling me how grateful they were for how amazing of a bag they just made from just putting their work on chain. And so, Jesse Pollock speaks a lot and champions the narrative around, build on the Superchain and you will be rewarded. I think the same is true of creators. If you create on the Superchain, the same is also true of collectors and curators. If you help to bring amazing work on chain, or if you help to engage amazing work on chain, you can be rewarded. And I think programs like We Heart the Art and RetroPGF really demonstrate that.
Yeah, 10 million, like a couple months ago, we did an airdrop and it was 10 million OP, literally creators across the Superchain that minted NFTs. Yeah. And so there will be a bunch of different campaigns, and it's tough. Like sometimes the campaigns ran where like they're not eligible, and that could be frustrating. That's why it's like having way more line of sight into what programs are out there that they can participate in and opt into, and like where it does meet what they're doing versus not. We've got to be able to get to that point. I think so much of it's going to be like all things in good decentralization is like more increased transparency and communication on all this stuff. We'll go along.
Yeah, the cool thing though is like if you're contributing to the advancement of the Superchain, there's a good likelihood that you will be rewarded. As a developer, a builder, an advocate, you name it, there's an avenue for you to be rewarded for your contributions, and that's super dope.
I think
that's pretty rare across the internet.
3 kind of economic levers that exist inside the Superchain. 1 is retro funding that has over 800 million OP tokens left in it. 2 is airdrops that have over I want to say 400 or 500 million. These are, you can look all of these up. They're like publicly tracked. And then Grants Council. So like 3 different mechanisms. They're all applicable to everyone inside of the Superchain. And the thing is like those that are in the Superchain are contributing sequencer fees back to the collective. And so like they're contributing their part too to this thing, right? So you kind of can see where this like flywheel is now starting to take shape with the Superchain.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I think on that note, looking kind of like the flywheel effect in the future, I want to discuss the outlook for the second half of the year for both the Superchain and Zora specifically. We've covered a lot of ground here, but the market, is strong right now. On that front, how important is the bear versus bull market when it comes to building and measuring success? Like, what is happening today that you think maybe would not have happened during the last bear cycle, and that you guys are really like grasping as like a win and running with it while you can?
I'll be interested, Dee. So I joined at the end of 21, this space. I've only known bear. So for me,
welcome.
So I've only known just like build. I have like on a personal level, like so much conviction in the space. I think it's going to take a while. It's going to play out. So like have the right time frames, horizons, try to be even keel, right? I I think we overreact both ways. It's not the end of the world in a bear, and it's not complete euphoria when we are, at peak excitement with the markets. And again, it goes back to like a theme I've been touching on, even talking about Zora as a team. It's like you chisel away, you iterate, you learn, you adapt, you iterate, right? And have the patience long term to do it. And again, try to stay middle of the road. It's too wild, like when like the sky was falling and 22, my family was like, "You okay? How are you doing?" I'm like, "It's fine. I'm not worried about it." The same people are not going to check on me when things are going like super well. So it's all
They're going to ask me what they should buy.
They're like, Ryan's doing well now. Yeah.
So it goes from being crazy to like, "Hey man, what's up?" So yeah.
100%.
Whether it's been like bull markets, I mean, we survived, I guess, a full cycle, like the whole go round now. You always want to be building valuable experiences for your users and creating valuable products and features for the people that you want to love your product. For us, it's creators and collectors and developers. And I think we spent a lot of our bear market season just hacking away and building things that were valuable to them, listening to user feedback, listening to what they wanted from the network and the protocol, and tried to build as much of that value as we could, so that when things do turn around and the market does, start to get exciting again, you're not scrambling for a feature they love. You're sort of already ready to go. But at the end of the day, you're always trying to create the most valuable experience for your user. And like the market could be amazing, the market could be absolutely trash. We're always going to try to build value for creators. And I think in any given cycle, there's always like new emergent phenomenon. I think we saw this with sort of like the transition from collectibles to content, everybody doing 10K PFPs to people then doing open editions. I think we saw that even in like token format transitions as people went now in this cycle from like really only NFTs to like, oh, can we get meme coins too? So you see all these different emergent phenomena that you have to sort of adapt to and keep up with. And I think if you don't have your sort of house in order during the quieter times, it can be very difficult to meet that demand. And to Ryan's earlier point too, it's like it's the sort of Brian Chesky statement of like, it's never as high as it seems or as low as it seems. You kind of got to stay even keel through it and just sort of build consistently. And then eventually, if you survive, things are pretty cool.
Surviving, that's what it is.
Yeah, as long as you make it through, that's what matters. So
analogy, just surviving sometimes is it's an impressive feat in and of itself.
It's good though for like founders who are starting projects when they think about runway and how ambitious should they get, how much should they like build up their teams, how much should they go full throttle. Like it's like you need to be very thoughtful. There's a time and place for it, and I think it's like very tricky in the Web3 crypto space to know when to throttle up or down. And so I think that's why the even keel part is particularly important, because it's so easy to emotionally react one way or another.
On that front, how are you two looking to make sure the momentum that's being built right now, through the previous bear market, maybe bull market, continues to grow in the near term, say by like the end of 2024, and then long term beyond that, where we don't really know what the future looks like?
For us, it's like it's like know where you want to go and like don't worry about a lot of this other stuff, right? Like there is a very clear path to the things that we want to do, and like having conversations with folks inside the Superchain, and it's just like stay focused on that. We are shipping fault proofs in stage 1 next month. You're in June, early June. Everyone will benefit from that. Then we're on interoperability product features because we know that's good for the users, that's good for developers. We're excited about like OP-Ref and other things that we're focused on. So nothing that matters, like whether we go into a bull or a bear or whatever, none of that will impact any of these plans, right? Like that's the plan in the next 12 months. We're marching forward. Does not matter. We have great talent. We'll keep adding great talent, and we're all going to keep building. And like, that's kind of how I think about it.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think for us, continue to abstract away a lot of the complexities for like interacting with amazing things that are built on the Superchain. First and foremost being the ability to create, particularly on Zora on the Superchain, and just making that as easy as possible so that we can onboard the millions and billions of people that we want to the Superchain. And then I think just continuing to, like I said earlier, we're sort of exiting the toddler stage, if you will, of Zora network, and building out the rest of the sort of requisite infrastructure that people need, continuing to get the rest of the DeFi protocols onboarded, continuing to get other marketplaces onboarded is going to be a big focus for us as we round out the rest of this year, so that people have everything they need on the Zora network, at least in lieu of us having full-blown interop. And so I think I'm really excited to sort of give developers and creators the systems that they need in order to continue to capture value from like the amazing technology that we have on chain.
Yeah. When it comes to specific subsectors in crypto and those building in the Superchain, what do you think is the most promising area for user adoption in Web3? Is it NFTs, DeFi, real world assets, gaming, or something else? D, I'd imagine
Ryan?
yours probably relates to Zora, but I would love to hear both your thoughts.
We're gonna let Ryan go first.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've achieved product market fit in the finance sector with DeFi. Like, there's so many incredible use cases. It's done. That's there. That's like numero uno. It's done. It's also a really important engine for all these other emerging, verticals. I think NFTs obviously have had like a run up, but I think we're going to think about them probably in a different way, which is more in line with how like Zora is thinking about it than these like crazy rare blue chip projects that, people are following along with. I think I am still excited about gaming. It's going to take a long time, right? I think it probably will take even longer to get adopted in the West. But yes, the infrastructure is getting better. The user journey is still like really difficult at this point. Interoperability over the next like 12 months will solve that. And so you have to think like developers have had so much complexity when building just to try to get application out and then cater to users, right? And so a lot of stuff is happening over the next year across the ecosystem to have a better like infrastructure and better user experience, which I think finally gives other verticals a real shot at emerging. Like tech savvy people, like financial focus, like it's why DeFi was able to kind of emerge and find success. Others will come online as some of this stuff gets easier. That's my kind of core belief where we're going.
Yeah, I think breakout success from any one category could be a tide that lifts all ships. And so I would love for that breakout category to be additions, media, social, whatever it is that you want to say we do. But like, I really, really think that that's an exciting area to help onboard net new people to crypto. It's kind of similar to like the prospect of the gaming vertical, where it's like, there's a lot of people who are sort of crypto adjacent, where we now have cool use cases for them, and like onboarding them at a rapid clip could be amazing. I think social has the same propensity to do that. And then there's also a world where like all of these things come together. Where like the things that I'm minting on Zora are things that I can use in the gaming ecosystem, which are things that I might put on my profile on like a social fi app, or there's like a world where all of these things start to mesh. And that's actually the world that the Superchain is building for anyways. And so that's exciting in and of itself. Because I do think these things will start to come together in many ways, where the things that you're minting on a social app might be the things that you use to unlock content in a game. That feels very healthy,
like they're all
in terms of a loop. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Feels like we have a lot to look forward to on this front then.
Oh yeah,
definitely.
A busy second half of the year, and for non-finance verticals for sure.
On the front of like quote unquote normal people outside of the Web3 ecosystem, or sometimes I like to call it a bubble occasionally. Not a bubble in the sense that it's gonna pop, but the bubble that like we all understand what's going on in here, but then if I go talk to a friend outside of this world, they're like, what are you talking about? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like a dialect from a neighborhood.
Exactly. What are some use cases that you two think are going to bring the normal people on chain? Is it that gaming front, those social aspects that you just talked about, D?
I mean, yeah. I have two sisters. One is like a pretty prominent TikTok influencer, and the other is like a high school volleyball phenom. And I use them as my like baseline for like how good is Zora at onboarding like younger, newer audiences. And I think we're getting close. We're getting close. I mean, if you were to look at like a Morning Consult report or a Pew Research report, a lot of the younger Gen Z audience, or maybe like the younger millennial audience, like they actually do view content creation and influencer careers as careers. They're looking for alternative career tracks that are fun and flexible ways for them to express their creativity and make money without having to go the sort of brand partnerships route, without having to go the sort of advertising route. And so I think there's like actually like really, really good, promising technologies now that we have as protocols like Zora that give you that opportunity. I'm super excited this summer for us to put it like in your hand on your phone, like actually launch the Zora mobile app, because I think it'll allow those things to sort of fully coalesce. But I think positioning the products that we do have today as products that can meet non like sort of banking DeFi-esque needs for these audiences could actually be the thing. And then making sure that the tech is super easy, i.e., you can sign up with an email. You don't need your seed phrase, and you can post without needing crypto, which you can do all of those things on Zora today. And you can mint to the Superchain, and Superchain collectors can bring that work onto the Superchain. Like, I think we're close. I think what we suffer from in many cases is like the language barrier that you described, not so much just the usability barrier anymore. It's like, hey, like what's the branding, positioning, and like values that are getting communicated by this product? And do they resonate with the people that we're looking to onboard? And so I think really meeting them where they're at and then demonstrating how the products that are now easy to use meet the needs that they have is a great way to get started.
Yeah, I think of it as like, there's probably two things that come to mind. One, working at YouTube in the early days, people were like, who's going to watch people play video games, right? And it was like, even gamers said that.
Millions
and then
of people.
You just kind of keep, still to this day, despite there's like 500 million logged in users watching gaming every day, like you just kind of chip away at it and be like, who's this audience, right? And so it started on YouTube as like really diehard fans that just wanted to watch like sniper montages and Minecraft, and like you just like chip away, and then all of a sudden you looked up and it was like 500 million users watching video games. And so that's like how I take to this space. And I think like we overcomplicate it. It's basically blockchain is like a product feature of the internet that is new and is being worked on. What is it going to enable? It's going to enable a unique way of ownership, right? And like, what does that actually mean is like, once we start to like pull away the blockchain jargon, it's like, you don't sit here and be like, oh, like Call of Duty, is it on AWS or Google Cloud? And like have these like deep conversations with your friends about cloud infrastructure and like what it does to the applications. You just want applications that do cool shit, right? And so I look at like loyalty and rewards, like the Delta example is great. It's like, oh, I have Delta airline status over here. That's valuable to Delta. I spent a lot of money on it. I should be able to show American Airlines verifiably that this is my status. American Airlines, if they knew they could verify that status, would maybe give me first class. Maybe they would match that status for me to come over. You can't do that now. You can't like print a piece of paper and be like, look, American Airlines, like I have this status with Delta. And so the way that you have to do that right now would be very cumbersome with like OAuth and authenticating your account on Delta and American Airlines. And just never going to do that shit. There's like privacy issues. It's like, it's a nightmare. And like spent time doing this with account linking at YouTube of like their Call of Duty accounts to match it with their YouTube account to say, oh, they're watching this video and we'll give them a loot drop. It's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. When you do all these things on blockchain, it's easy. It's in your wallet. Boom, there's his platinum NFT 2024 Delta status. I'm going to match it and bring it over. And so I think people, when they realize like, oh shit, I actually can do that, I'm going to start pushing on Delta and American Airlines to be like, you know what? You kind of screwed me over. I thought the little loyalty rewards program was actually beneficial to me. I'm actually getting screwed over. I have huge purchasing power. Let me do it. So these type of things will show themselves in different ways over time. I mean, I just looked at League of Legends. They're selling a damn $500 faker skin, and people are going to buy that thing and never be able to do anything with it other than play with it. So it's getting to the point where it's like, people are going to get pushed too far in the current Web 2 environment that you see. And at the same time, over the next 5 years, you're going to see an alternative option. You're going to see an alternative option to Instagram. What does that mean for you as a creator, right? And it's like Zora pops up and you're like, yeah, screw this. Like, I actually should be able to do all these things. I should be able to own these things. I should be able to make money off these things. I should be able to have like more sense of community with the people that are holding my mints and all of this. So yeah, I think at some point you get a breaking point where people recognize actually how screwed over they are in these Web 2 systems. And at the same time, you finally have like a reputable infrastructure and reputable applications, which we haven't yet. It's like just now emerging right in our ecosystem. So yeah, these things take time. It's okay. Once it happens, everyone will be like, of course, that was obvious. Like, of course people want to watch video games. People love video games. It's a huge thing. It's like, it'll be obvious to everyone in hindsight.
Yeah, 100%. To wrap things up, I want to move to some of the questions that we got during this call. Kind of going off of what we were just talking about, one of the questions, Dee, was curious what things Zora's team is most excited about in their space in the coming year. And then, does Zora have any plans to attract DeFi trading platforms or other toolings besides NFTs?
Short answer to the second question is yes. We would like to see a robust and diverse set of activity on our network. We've been intentionally building our network and our audience out, though, as a creator-centric network, a network that can, provide them with the safety and security they need. That, I'm not on something that feels like every other crypto network. I think now that we've sort of established that, we're ready to layer on some of the other DeFi protocols, which many of our creators are excited to go try. And so that's the focus there. And then what are we most excited about in our space this coming year? The Zora app. The Zora mobile app.
Go check it out.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Mobile app. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm really excited to make Zora easier to use. We're excited it's like some pretty slick stuff on the minting side. I don't want to give anything away, but it's going to be a pretty magical experience for anybody that's looking to
Zora
mint their phone.
That's going to be huge. I'm stoked for that.
Yeah, so that's probably what we're most excited about.
Amazing. Okay, and then Ryan, one of the questions was more of a statement, but they have a question mark at the end. Don't you think that, quote, abstracting away, quote, blockchain creation and knowledge will lead to centralization in the tech stack? I mean, what happens if everyone uses the OP stack? Wouldn't that be something that we want to avoid to reduce single points of failure?
Oh, I look at it like, look, Blast uses the OP stack. They have nothing to do with Superchain. It's MIT open license. It's open source. You can go do anything with it. Yeah, I think it's valid. But also, if you think about all the chains that are in the Superchain, they can exit. They can go do what they want. The people are voting. The people have a voice. The chains have a voice. So yeah, yes and no. Like, I can appreciate, oh my gosh, everyone's on OP stack. Like, is that a point of centralization? It's like, it's open license. People can go run with it. So if Zora's like, we're out, it's not like, give me back OP stack. They're like, they can go take it and go run with it, modify it, do whatever. And so I actually think Blast is like a beautiful example of somebody, they don't contribute, they're not part of the Superchain, they don't contribute revenue, they do nothing for the Optimism ecosystem at all. They just took it as an MIT open license and ran with it. So the open source nature gives me like a good feeling that wouldn't be an issue.
Mm-hmm. Lastly, the last question is, someone said that the current Optimism Collective governance protocol is way too complex. I think this was during the funding conversation. What are you guys doing to work on it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is really complex. I think a couple of things. It is complex. I think over time, as these become systems that people are used to, like decentralization and like how governance works, people will become more familiar with the general framework. Like, a lot of people that are coming in, they're just being introduced to like, oh my gosh, this blockchain has to, pass these votes to do upgrades, or like people vote on should I get a grant or not, and all of these things is like, it's conceptually just new. So like, you got to learn that. Then you got to learn how Optimism does it and their framework. So yeah, it is confusing. I think two things. It's like, you make it easier over time, and people, ride the learning curve of like understanding how these governance systems work inside the ecosystem. It's a lot for everyone to learn. Like, I've been learning, even coming from Polygon, where we didn't really have these governance systems at all, to like Optimism, where they are like, the best at governance systems in this ecosystem. And so, yeah, I would agree. Like, there's definitely a lot of work that needs done to simplify this long term, and it's work in progress.
Yeah, these things take time. And
they take
time. Speaking of time, this is my segue. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you to everyone who listened in, and thank you to Ryan and Dee for your insightful comments. Looking forward to doing this again.
Thanks for having us. This was fun.
Thank you. This is great.
Yeah, to wrap up Friday.
Yes.
Cool.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks.